Fast Fusion races onto the Switch 2 right at launch, and it's a game that demands more attention. After all, Fast RMX was one of the best launch titles for the original Switch, and still looks and plays great 7 years later. Fast Racing Neo also originally delivered a great experience on the Wii U before it was later remixed into Fast RMX for a second lap on the more successful Switch. Now, admittedly, I assumed Fast Fusion would finish in second place against Mario Kart World in competition for my time. However, a couple days into owning my Switch 2, I've found the opposite is true. I'm having a blast with Fast Fusion, while Mario Kart struggles for my attention for various reasons, but that's a topic for another video. In my opinion, there's a strange shortage of brand new games at launch for Switch 2 relative to the wait, but I hope that means people give Fast Fusion a chance. As a side note, for this video I'll only be showing footage from the first 6 tracks of Fast to avoid spoiling all the great environments. So Fast Fusion is an awesome and unusual game in many respects. For starters, let's address the elephant Mario in the room, which is Switch 2 pricing. Despite the high price point of nearly every aspect of the Switch 2, Fast Fusion somehow crosses the finish line at a mere $15. To put that in perspective, Mario Kart World is around $85 with tax, almost 6 times as expensive as Fast Fusion. Obviously, Mario Kart World is a flagship franchise and larger in scope, but I would argue Fast Fusion is a worthy rival in terms of visuals, overall quality, and pure fun. Second, the fact that Fast Fusion exists at all is unusual. The sci-fi arcade racing subgenre has been on life support for years, kept alive mostly by smaller indie titles and a couple survivors like Redout, while many legendary franchises like F-Zero, Wipeout, and Extreme are effectively dead at this point. If you follow my channel, you know I'm a big fan of arcade racing games, so it's great to see the genre receive such strong support during the Switch 2 launch. Fast Fusion is also refreshing in its simplicity. It's increasingly rare to find a modern racing game of this production level with such a pure focus on, well, just racing. There's no open world collectathon, no microtransactions to buy cars or remove grinding gates, no character customization screen to decide on the haircut or shoes or facial structure of your driver, no extensive training tutorials where you need to work for a driver's license, and most importantly, you don't have to complete 700 races to afford one vehicle, my biggest pet peeve in modern racing games. Modern games constantly confuse stuff with value, but I digress. Now, unlike Fast RMX, which was partially a remix of Neo with tracks added, Fast Fusion is mostly an entirely new game. Every track is new, the visuals are massively upgraded, the gameplay has evolved, and the music and presentation are new. Ships have been recycled from previous titles, but there's an interesting spin on the roster with the new Fusion system. More on that later. Although Fusion only includes a dozen tracks, every single one of them is interesting and often beautiful. From vast canyons to industrial compounds or spaceports, these levels offer rich environments packed with detail, drawn at an impressive scope for a hybrid device. Interesting environmental effects add layers of interactivity beyond what we saw in past entries. You'll occasionally race across water, into impressive storms, or through asteroid belts, and even dodge giant worker robots. I'm really hoping we'll receive more great tracks through DLC like we did with Fast RMX on Switch 1. Interestingly, Fusion also offers 4 different graphics modes when docked and 2 in handheld. In docked mode, Performance and Balanced mode list the same set of graphical effects except for resolution, which is set at either 1080p or 1440p depending on which target resolution you prefer. Then there's also Quality mode, which still runs at 60 FPS, but offers 4K resolution by sacrificing certain shadow effects. This mode and others seem to rely on some form of upscaling or dynamic resolution scaling. The image quality doesn't look perfect enough to be true 4K, but it still runs well, and it's the mode I use the majority of the time. Finally, there's an ultra quality mode that only runs at 30 FPS during gameplay, but I would not recommend it. The speed of the gameplay simply demands 60 FPS, and the visual bump isn't nearly big enough to offset that loss. Unfortunately, no matter which mode you pick, I did experience sort of a slight graininess or murky edges on and off if you look closely. In handheld mode, you only have 2 choices of performance or quality. Performance delivers 60 FPS at 1080p, dynamic shadows, and HDR. There's also a quality mode at 30 FPS that swaps dynamic shadows for the vague label of high-quality graphics. Unfortunately, neither of these options is ideal. Although it's impressive that there's a 60 FPS mode at all in portable mode, the graphics often appear noisy and lose detail in such large environments, which I did find to be distracting. Quality mode looks noticeably better, but the racing feels less responsive at 30 FPS, which is a big loss. Fast Fusion also introduces new gameplay elements to establish its own identity and feel. The new jump mechanic is the most noticeable. Jumping creates interesting opportunities for shortcuts, as well as risky maneuvers to acquire more boost tokens at the risk of destroying your ship. The jump mechanic is used sparingly. There's only a few tracks that require manually timing jumps. The fast games also use a unique phase shift system where you toggle between blue and orange energy phases with the press of a button to match colored boost strips on the tracks. This was a huge component of racing in Fast RMX, but it has been toned down just a touch here in Fast Fusion, probably for the better. The boost strips themselves also have a more textured, weighty look and feel to them, which is a nice change as well. And that sense of weight applies to the broader gameplay mechanics. In general, the ships and controls in Fusion have a much heavier feel than Fast RMX or Neo. Ships appear larger and just move with a greater sense of weight. The visual style of Fast Fusion is closer to realism, so I think this change meshes well with the overall presentation, and the tracks have been designed accordingly. The speed of the races is determined by which class you select, just like in previous titles. Fast Fusion offers subsonic, supersonic, and hypersonic, each with increasing speed. I think Fast Fusion does a better job than RMX of managing the control of ships at high speeds thanks to this increased weight, control finesse, and superior track design. Speaking of the ships, the most notable new system is the Fusion Shop. After you purchase ships using in-game credits, you can use them to create new hybrid vehicles by selecting two to fuse together. Fused vehicles combine stats to some degree to become more powerful. So for example, you can combine a ship with low acceleration but high boost with a ship that has the opposite stats to get the best of both worlds. The fusing process also receives a rating such as B or A+ to show how successful the combination is, and so unlocking more ships provides more fusion options. Strangely, the game never fully explains exactly how the fuse system works in detail or what determines the final results, at least not that I could find. You basically must play around and see what works, and it can be confusing. For example, if you fuse ship A with ship B, you don't necessarily get the same results as if you select ship B and then fuse with A. Once you fuse two ships together, they are no longer available to use individually until you dismantle the fused ships back into the two originals. Overall, I have kind of mixed feelings about this fusion system. In practice, it's not all that different than if you were to just unlock more powerful vehicles as you progress. Ship stats are basic, comprised of only acceleration, top speed, boost, and weight, so building an entire stats fusing system seems like overkill. However, the resulting ships do look cool, and it's sort of fun to try out different combinations and see how they look and feel. Thankfully, the new currency system of Fast Fusion is pretty generous, which makes it easy to play around with the fusion system and not deeply regret the results of your testing. When I first saw the currency system in action, I was dreading that the game would quickly turn into a mobile game style grind slog, but that's not the case. You do have to purchase new cups and ships to use them, but I never felt like I had to sit and endlessly grind through cups to earn money to progress. You can unlock everything in the game in a few hours if you're really trying to do that. Perhaps my only real disappointment with Fast Fusion is the lack of a true online multiplayer mode. The game does support local multiplayer with up to 4 players, and has support for game share and game chat with 2 players, but that's a bit limited with so few Switch 2s out there right now. There is not a full-size traditional online matchmaking component to speak of. I think this would have elevated Fusion to a more substantial package beyond its predecessors with longer engagement value. At $15 though, that's probably just too much to ask, but I would have paid more for this. Overall though, Fast Fusion is a great launch title that anyone with even a mild appreciation of racing games should pick up as a fun introduction to the Switch 2. It presents a meaningful technical and gameplay evolution over its predecessors, offering a modern yet retro experience for a reasonable price. Please consider subscribing to follow more Switch 2 content right from the starting line here, and I'll see you next time.